So, hey guys, welcome back to Ali and George's Fight Companion. Now, you've only got me today as George will not be joining us for this segment of the podcast, but I am very pleased to announce that I am joined with Rahim. How are you doing today?
Man, I'm having a swell time, Ollie. I am not in the thick of it, as it were. Usually I'm wherever the action is, which was Saudi just last Saturday. But I find myself on the west coast of America, where I am from, and enjoying a little bit of a reprieve from ringside. However, the boxing news does not stop. So here we are. Happy to be on your show for the first time. You were very assertive in asking me to join you, and you followed up again, and we finally got it done. So respect that, and I'm looking forward to the show.
No, no, thank you very much for joining me and for giving up your time to speak to me now. How busy are you? You know, you mentioned that you was in Saudi not too long ago. Like, how hectic is your schedule?
Well, you'll notice, boxing used to be very American central as far as the big fights. So, being that I am American, lived on the West Coast, Vegas was a primary location for big fights. And even then, I was on the road at least half the year, while the Staples Center and StubHub and more of the venues in Los Angeles would host fights. So, I didn't have to travel to go to those events. Still, just going to Vegas. May every blue moon it would be New York, and then a random off-brand city here and there, depending on where the fighter might be from. And it would take me probably 20 to 25 years, 20 to 25 weeks out of the 52-week year on the road. Now that most of the big shows are in either the United Kingdom or Saudi Arabia on the other side of the Atlantic, it requires me to be over there. I mean, I'd say even being there, I'm looking at 30 to 35 weeks on the road. So most of the year is spent going from one city to the next. And it's unfortunate for the American audience that a lot of those fights now that used to be in Vegas for a while were in New York once the UFC kind of broke the mold on the insurance issue. That was a big insurance issue in New York, which is why big fights weren't happening there for years and years. And then the UFC managed to massage legislation, which they appear to be looking to do again as we currently speak, to make it possible for combat sports to happen in New York. So for a minute, it kind of shifted to New York. What we didn't realize at the time was that I was shifted from Vegas to New York, and it was going to keep going across the Atlantic and land in the United Kingdom where it is now. So, I mean, if you're going to cover this sport diligently and stay on top of it, you're going to be packing and unpacking most Monday mornings.
But oh wow, no, it does seem like a huge commitment, and I commend you for all of your coverage. Now, I want to sort of go back to your earlier life and sort of speak to you about how you got into this profession. Now, it is a very fascinating profession. It can lead you to lots of different places, meeting lots of cool people. How did you get your big break in life in this profession?
I don't know that a big break per se ever came my way. It was more of a opening of doors as I continued to arrive at another opportunity. So as I didn't have some kind of predetermined notion about where I was going or what trajectory this was going to take, like some hard and fast idea, "Oh, I want to work here at this time and do exactly this." It really became something that I created as I went along, right? It started in Wild Card Boxing Gym in Los Angeles, like I say, on the west coast of the United States, with Freddie Roach having only recently opened the gym at that time. And it was James Toney who was the big man on campus. He was the biggest fighter in the gym. He was kind of at the sunset of his career, but as most fighters didn't really know it, just thought he was at another stage of his prime as he was running the gym and still getting big fights. And I would shoot sparring sessions, which again at the time very uncommon for fighters to put themselves on tape or to have any kind of footage to review from training. All they really had were the fights themselves. And what happened in the ring, they had to trust their trainers and handlers to tell them what it looked like and try to reimagine what it felt like and improve based on that. So it wasn't like I invented videography. However, I did introduce it into the gyms in a way it just wasn't being used. So from that point, fighters would start buying these sparring sessions from me, and that was how I would pay my gym dues. And Freddie would pay me something if he asked me to shoot a certain thing. And he was so savvy right out the gate. For instance, if he was trying to get a fighter to work on his footwork, he'd be like, shoot the sparring or shoot the pad work, but just video the feet. Yeah, if he wanted him to learn a combination, he would run the combination 3 or 4 times on the video, and he's like, make a tape for this guy so he can watch the combinations and train off of it. And so we worked well together that way. And ultimately, because the gym was so busy, James was such a big star at the time, there would be great sparring sessions in there from notable fighters, champions, contenders. People would go in there to get work. And because people weren't as precious as they are now about being videoed, then a show that I developed called Gym Wars became a sensation online. I would shoot sparring sessions of these marquee fighters as they got ready for major events and either sell them the tapes or put them online. And I would commentate the show. I call it a show. I would commentate the sparring session as if you were watching a show on HBO or Showtime. And so it was myself and Doug Fisher, who's now the ring editor for the Ring magazine, editor in chief. We would sit there and call the fight, do commentary, do color, put it up as if you're watching it on television, as if it were some kind of main event fight. And that show really took off. That was the first show online that catered to boxing in that way. And then Max Boxing, which was the site that he and I both worked for, that Doug Fisher and Steve Kim started together, was the first big website that would report on boxing. So what happened is, as the internet and people got more familiar with it and realized how far-reaching it was and became a little bit more precious about being filmed, it became harder for us to get sparring sessions on tape so that we could put it online. And the more that the show grew and people wanted more content, I would start interviewing fighters before sparring sessions, after sparring sessions. I'd start making kind of narrative videos about the fighter around the spar. And those bits of content also took off. And that's where the interviewing started. And then I started to go to fights and interview them there. And this was something that wasn't being done. Granted, there was, major outlets like Fox Sports West or ESPN that would cover the fight sparingly, talk about who won and who lost, maybe do 1 or 2 interviews with a main event fighter if he's a huge name, and put them on their general sports show as a segment. But what I was doing was going to the events, recording interviews with everybody involved and putting them up singularly as an ongoing kind of news outlet. And that was the first of its kind. So that is where the current boxing news formula comes from me having started that way back then when nobody was doing it.
Well, yeah, no, so what it seems like to me is that you revolutionized a sort of way, well, in which boxing is covered in the media. And from what it seems like, so you used your own initiative to think outside the box, to do what other people were not doing, and I really commend you for that. What gave you the idea, the spark to first sort of film the sparring sessions?
Well, I was film loading on major motion pictures. So initially my idea was I wanted to be a director of films and television, and I wanted to operate the camera myself, which was something that most directors don't do, but some who think of themselves as artists or particularly talented will shoot with their own camera on their own shoulder or on their own dolly. And that was something that appealed to me. So I was learning that side of film business. And at the time, I was working as a film loader. Now most things are digital, and film loaders are sparse because very few people shoot on film. But then that's the only way you were shooting anything, really, especially films. So I took my little camera rig to the gym initially to help shoot action, work shadows, figure out my angles, and be good at camera operating. I was using sparring just as live action, not really thinking about what it could do for the fighters themselves, but that's expensive. It's hours and hours in a sweaty gym, and I needed to make some money. And I realized that this is something that the fighter might pay for because most fighters are pretty egotistical. So if anything, they just want to see themselves or show off if they did well in sparring. So I would put those sparring sessions on tape, and it took me hours when I got home to like edit out other people because no fighter wants to see two other guys. He only wants a part that he's in. So I didn't have to take his parts of, out of the rest of the content, put it together, cut it together, put that on a VHS at the time, and then give it to him for what I was charging $20 a pop. And then on top of that, I'd get Freddie to pay me if he wanted something shot. And then I made a little hustle out of it. That's where it began. And then these things became newsworthy, which is how we got into the story I just told.
Right, okay, cool. So, from what it seems like you were passionate about boxing for a very, very long time. So, my question to you is, what's your favorite boxing memory growing up? What's that one fight that you remember, or that one moment in the ring that you remember watching that quickly grasped your attention into boxing?
There are multiple ones, but the one I will mention now, I think had maybe the most profound effect on me because I remember it the most vividly, which is Tyson Spinks. That fight was one that I had just noted in real time how many people were talking about it and how many of my family members were arguing about what was going to happen, how much of a conversation it was, like across, it seemed like at the time I was very young, obviously, but every room I was in, it seemed like everybody was talking about this fight and who was going to win, and people were shouting at each other and were stating facts and arguing about what the facts were. And it seemed like a non-stop conversation for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I was like, at this time, I understood the sport and that it was a sport and that people were arguing about the outcome of a fight. However, it really made an impression on me how important it was to them before the fight happened. And so when it did happen, I remember vividly sitting down. We were, I believe, in Washington State at the time at like an uncle's house, and everybody crowded around the TV, and the fight was ready to happen, and people were still arguing right down to the first bell. And then it was such a one-sided 92 seconds of Mike Tyson destroying Spinks and him falling through the ropes. And that was probably one of the most aha moments in life, like, because so many people were so adamant and so wrong. I was like, oh, so nobody, even the people who were arguing that Tyson was going to win, weren't saying it was going to happen like that, right? I remember everybody's argument, all the different ways they said it could happen, who picked whom to win, how sure they were right. And pretty much nobody was right. Like nobody said 92 seconds, this thing is going to be over with. And so that was so thrilling and also puzzling and also just like, oh, this is a thing that nobody really knows, but everybody's so passionate about right up until the moment it happens. And then it's a surprise for everybody. It was the shock of it and the thrill that everybody got. Even the people who were wrong were still out of their seats cheering and like screaming. It was that energy that you want to capture. I mean, thank God it wasn't a drug because that's the energy I've been chasing ever since then.
Well, yeah, that I reckon like a similar feeling for me was when Amir Khan, coming from a British Pakistani heritage like I am, um, like looking at a fighter like Amir Khan, who everyone around me, especially me, can relate to see him get knocked out by Canelo was a very, very sad moment. So
Mm.
yeah, that was that for me. But I
Did
want
you
to.
think he was going to win that fight? We're going in. Were you like, Amir's going to get it done?
I, oh man, I mean it's tough to.
Oh, that's a no. That's a no. Here's a little solace. Listen, I know you wanted him to win. I don't have to ask you that, but I don't think deep in your heart you thought he would. However, the cold comfort is he was winning that fight up until the moment he got knocked out. He was winning that fight. The only thing is that I believe Canelo was unbothered with the scorecards because the entire time he was waiting to land exactly the punch that he landed. He thought this was going to be a knockout. But credit to Amir Khan, you don't see even in this day and age as many fighters willing to step up and take a challenge like that. He knew how up against it he was. He knew how likely it would be that he'd get knocked out, and yet he still accepted the challenge and went in there and tried to do the business. He wasn't even really on weight with Canelo. There's a lot of disadvantages, but he was able to outbox him as long as he could stay awake. And so credit to Amir on that one.
Yeah, I think like going into that fight, because I saw, wow, this is a British Pakistani who's at the world stage against the best in the world. Like for me going into that fight, I didn't really like something in my mind knew that he probably wasn't gonna win, but I was just so gassed for him to even get like for even get to for even getting to that point to
Mhm.
earn a shot like that at Canelo. But yeah, just to see him get hit with that shot wasn't, yeah, it was
You're devastated. You're still not over it. I see tears welling up in your eyes right now. Like, you got to continue this interview, bro. You can't have a lump in your throat right now. You shouldn't even brought this up.
yeah, yeah, I know. And like, like as you mentioned, like he was outboxing Canelo, but Canelo didn't seem to be bothered by that because as he was doing was trying to line Amir up for that one big shot, which he did. So
Yeah.
yeah, that was no, so that was that. So I kind of wanted to speak to you about now, I've seen that you've, been asked about this so many times, so I don't want to bore you with it too much. But about the Deontay Wilder clip that went viral a few, so many years ago. What was going through your mind as he was going on this big rant?
I was wondering who he was talking to. Like, he was clearly upset at someone. I was like, for a minute there, I thought we were on the same page. Like, yeah, we're both like screaming at white America. Let's go. It took me till this day to realize that he was talking to me. So yeah, what was going through my mind was, how great this was going to be that we were both shouting at the institutional racism of the United States. And then after that, I was a little bit like, oh, okay. Well, apparently, if I'm the problem, then why don't you explain the overall issue? And I think that he didn't have the words, maybe not as articulate in the moment to be able to do that. So he decided that I would be the subject of his ire. But with that said, what I was hoping to glean from the moment was his impression of the struggle that really, I think, marked the chip on his shoulder and the aggression with which he fights, because you got to remember he's from Alabama. That is the deep South, and they have entrenched institutional slavery and a slave mentality there well beyond the Civil War, and even legislation that would suggest black people were free and full citizens. Well, in Alabama, I don't know if that's true even today. So the way he came up and the mentality he had, the anger from that experience that I think he carries with him till this day, was informing his emotion. And I was hoping that he would explain that to a global audience, being that Tyson Fury was his opponent, a British fighter who was bringing an audience that may not understand just from referencing 400 years what it is he was talking about. Now, he didn't give a great answer in regard to that. However, he created with me a moment that did more than I would have ever thought an answer to that question could have done. So it overachieved. The moment did more than I had anticipated for sure, or even hoped for. And so now it's an iconic piece of boxing history that we share. I think it is important for the culture that it happened.
Now this now leads me on to my next question was what's one of your favorite boxing interviews that you have done, or one that particularly sticks out in your mind as like, yeah, this is gold. Like,
Sugar Ray Leonard, which wasn't a huge interview. I mean, I've interviewed him a few times, but there was one time I was covering a documentary on Johnny Tapia. And it's a tragic story if you know Tapia's story post boxing. Of course, he was an incredible fighter in the ring, but boy, he was up against it in life. And his documentary was airing. It was a premiere, and Sugar Ray Leonard happened to attend that premiere. Credit to him. He was always there for, fighters in his era and beyond. And so we did an interview, kind of impromptu, and we sat out in the lobby of a theater, really meaning just to talk about the Tapia movie. But then, because Tapia struggled with drugs and had so many personal issues in life that uh, some challenges he never did overcome, it touched Sugar Ray's spirit, and he understood and related to that aspect of Tapia's life. And he went on to talk about that in the interview, and we just kind of rolled with it. It became a very intimate moment where he was open and honest about his life and these kind of challenges, and what it meant to him pre and post career, and how it affected his boxing at the time and where he was with it right there in life. And so I wasn't expecting the conversation to go there, but from that point on, we've been great friends. That was a incredible conversation that we had, and it happened, I will say, because at that point I also felt like I had learned enough about the craft of journalism and interviewing to let the conversation go where it was naturally headed and accept what was happening without trying to direct it or edit it or push it one way or the other, and really just have a conversation. That's probably the most important thing I've learned in this business. And that moment, I realized, oh, I do that now naturally, and this is what can happen if you stick to that uh, formula. I've never been this guy, but I see a lot of people will write out questions and have their whole idea of what this interview is going to be and where you're going to go next. And what makes you do is you stop listening and just start waiting to ask the next question, and you miss a detour or you miss a follow up that will take you down a completely different road that is far more interesting. As great as that movie was, and the Tapia documentary is great, no conversation we were going to have about that movie was better than the conversation we ended up having about Sugar Ray's life. And if I had not been listening or just waiting to ask my next predetermined question, I would have directed him back to the film and never gotten what he wanted to talk about.
Right. Yeah, now I aspire to be somewhat similar in that I wouldn't really say I prepare a whole list of questions before going into interviews. I just like I would just like well I would just like to naturally lead to where the interview leads to, and no, that's yeah, no, that seems like a very very profound piece of media that you was a part of, and yeah, no, and also so yeah, so just now on to the next bit. I kind of wanted to speak to you about the current state of boxing. You know, as you've just seen, just before this interview, that Jake Paul will be taking on Javante Davis in Atlanta, I believe. What's your opinion on that kind of fight?
It's entertainment. It's an exhibition, and thank God. First of all, I don't even know you couldn't get that sanctioned because of the weight differential, not even because of the experience differential. Ironically, that wouldn't even be a high hurdle. If they were at the same weight, the experience that Jake Paul now brings into the ring, he could get sanctioned anywhere by any state athletic commission and probably any one of these four belt organizations. However, there's no way they're going to come anywhere close to being the same weight, whether it's Javante coming up or Jake going down. So they have to make it an exhibition. And now, because it's an exhibition, I don't have to sit here with you and be outraged, right? An exhibition's fine. They're both going to get their money. It's going to be a spectacle. I don't know how that's going to work, but we're all going to tune in to find out. And they've got the right to do it. I think Javante is going to take a lot of criticism for not rematching Lamont Roach. And, he was meant to have had that fight already by now. And now clearly that fight isn't coming anytime soon and may never happen. Uh, and I don't know that it does much for Jake Paul. I mean, granted, it would be wild if he knocks out Tank Davis. But I mean, that's a crazy image to have in my head. but I didn't know that it does much for him because he's 75 pounds heavier than this guy. And the difference in experience is vast, but that kind of weight, you know, it is hard to imagine that if Jake just is able to block shots, that there's anything Javante can do, even with his punching power at 135 pounds, it's going to be to knock over a 200, 210 heavyweight, essentially. It's possible, but it's not likely. So, yeah, there's much to discuss about this exhibition and what it might look like, but who knows, man? I'm just glad I don't have to be mad about it.
Yeah, I think what it seems like to me is that Javante Davis looks like he's done at the top level at his kind of realm because if he's not rematching Amon Roach and he is taking fights against the likes of Jake Paul and totally dismissing guys like Shakur Stevenson, like other active competitors in his weight class, that it, it looks like he is now done at that level. What do you think of that kind of notion?
No, certainly not, unless he wants to be. He's not done at that level simply because this is happening. He's still able to pick up a phone and call anybody in his weight division or a division above, or clearly a heavyweight, and say, I want the fight. And they will drop everything and fight him next because he's the cash cow. He can do whatever he wants to do in his weight division in boxing. And now he's found himself another cash cow. So they're going to get together and become a whale. These two guys are going to make crazy money for a crazy fight. Now, you've got to remember that Javante just had some legal trouble that got dismissed, so he won't be going to court and stuff on that. But clearly, there's been some distractions, and maybe he hasn't been as focused on his career in the gym and training, the kind of dedication that competing at that level requires. So if he's not ready to focus, he's not ready to dedicate that kind of energy and time to training for elite athletes in his division, then it makes sense that he might say, you know what? While I'm not ready to do that, I'm certainly ready to make a bag that will be bigger than probably three of those fights combined. And that's what he's chosen to do. It doesn't mean that after this fight, he can't come back and fight any or all of those guys. Also, doesn't mean that he will. It's not looking great. It's not looking like it's something he's excited to do, but it doesn't mean that it's over.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. I think another sort of potential fight that could be on the cards, maybe, maybe not, is I did mention the name Shakur Stevenson. He says he wants to fight with Conor Ben. That looks to be likely if Conor can't get that rematch over the line with Chris Eubank Jr. What's your thoughts on that potential matchup?
Now that matchup's happening. The rematch with Conor Ben and Chris Eubank Jr. That's on. That is happening. Yeah, yeah. That'll be in November. It's gonna be a hell of a November. We're gonna get Tank and Paul. We're gonna get Eubank Ben. We're gonna get the big card in Saudi on the 22nd. So yeah, before the end of the year, all that stuff's gonna happen. I don't think that Shakur Stevenson really tops Conor Ben's list as far as who he'll want to fight. I think he's going to want to fight Mario Barrios if Mario still has the title by the time that fight can be made. I think Conor Ben's going to want to become a world champion when he's finished with this Eubank saga. And Shakur Stevenson at this point is probably going to have to find a different opponent, certainly for his next fight. Uh, but everybody's attention, especially on the other side of the pond, is going to be Eubank Ben too.
Yeah, it is, yeah. Now, we all saw how that first fight went between Eubank and Ben. Do you see it going any way different in this rematch?
Yeah, well, it certainly could. You know, the good money on boxing is always whoever won the first fight, double down on the second because they're probably going to win it easier. This case, age might play a factor. You know, obviously nobody's getting any younger, but Eubank is older, not fighting in between. Maybe he ages on the night. The fight was close down the stretch. Bin was still able to come on. They're gonna, at least as far as it's been reported now, have the exact same weight limit and restrictions. The rehydration clause will be in place. All the things that made Eubank struggle to get into the fight the first time will be in place the second time and likely harder for him to accomplish. So in that sense, there'll be stress on the body. He'll maybe have made an even harder time making the weight if he can even get it. He didn't even get it last time. He had to pay that $500,000. All those things can be factors that might put enough weight on the scale, if you will, for Connor Ben to change the outcome. And if it does, if somehow Ben gets it done, then we'll see three. We will see a third if that happens. So it's certainly possible. However, the smart money would still have to be on Eubank.
Yeah. And lastly, I won't take too much of your time. The fight of the century is coming up between Terence Crawford and Canelo. How could we not talk about that? Yeah, that fight there is a very, very interesting one now. Now it's a bit of a it's a bit of an impossible sort of one to call, but who have you got in that one?
Funny that you call it fight of the century. First of all, there's some other fights that might compete with that one, and we're pretty early in the century, so I don't know if it's gonna hold water. There is an intrigue to this fight because of the weight differential, because it's two guys we never thought we would see face each other, because of where they are in their careers and at the age they are in life. This thing may go sideways, and sideways for me would be Crawford winning. Not because he doesn't have the skill, but because he's taking on so many challenges at once, taking on so many disadvantages in this fight. And I think Canelo is 100% up for it. He believes that he is an overmatched, that Crawford is overmatched. Canelo believes that. He thinks that this is a bit of an absurd premise in the first place. And it is, which is why Crawford is daring to be great. It's so absurd. It's so far fetched. It's such a huge hurdle to ask him to clear that if he wins it, he's correct. He will be on the Mount Rushmore of boxing. And how he does it, we just can't know until he starts doing that. I don't know if he plans to bulk up and lean on punching power. I don't know if he plans to stay light on his feet and give Canelo angles and maybe think that he can outbox the guy and never let Canelo really let off on him and win the fight on points. Maybe it's a combination of the two. Maybe he surprises everybody and thinks, he's going to work inside, which I think is the most dangerous approach, and go to Canelo's body and outwork him in close range. I don't know what Crawford has in mind, but I know he's a boxing scientist, that he will come in there with a very detailed game plan that has been designed specifically to beat Canelo on that night. And we'll see if him and Bowman can put together the formula, or as Oscar De La Hoya would say, the blueprint to take Canelo out. But once again, I say Canelo has to be the smart money favorite, but Crawford is certainly up to the task and could easily shock the world with a win. And when I say easily, it's easily shocking if he wins. It won't be easy for him to accomplish.
Yeah. Well, I just got a notification this live will end soon, but I mean, it's kind of crazy because I remember watching the Errol Spence fight with Crawford, and I actually thought that Errol Spence was going to win that one. But obviously, in hindsight, things transpired how it happened, and now Terence is fighting against just a pound for pound machine. But no, I'm very, very excited for that one. Apparently, it's on Netflix as well, right?
It's definitely on Netflix. Yeah, it'll be the first fight promoted by TKO, Dana White. It's going to be a spectacle. It's going to be a whole week of big events. Netflix is going to cash in, boxing is going to cash in. And I like boxing on that platform. They do good production. It's going to be something to see. And I believe both fighters are going to deliver their absolute best on the night. I can't wait to find out what happens.
For sure, for sure. Well, thank you, Radio Rahim. It has been an absolute pleasure. You are one of my heroes when it comes to all of this. So, yeah, and I thank you very much, and I fully appreciate you taking your time out to speak to me today. And good luck with everything.
All right, it's been a pleasure. Good luck to you, Ali. Tell your co-host that we missed him on this one, but we'll get him on the next one. Maybe post Canelo Crawford. There'll be a UFC element since it'll be Dana White's first promotion, and we can talk boxing, a bit of UFC. Keep it up, man. And I'm looking forward to seeing the show come out.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. Thank you very much. Thank you.